He was hanging upside down, and his feet were kicking in the air. A huge crowd of people was below, shouting and cheering loudly. Blood was coming from a wound on his head, running down his face and dripping onto the ground of a gas station in the city of Milan. Just one day before this, he was wearing a German soldier's coat and quietly saying that he just wanted to escape to Switzerland. But now, Benito Mussolini, who was called Il Duce and had once promised to make Italy a great nation again, was dead. He was hanging upside down next to his mistress, Clara Petacci. Their shirts had fallen down towards their waists, and their faces were so badly beaten that you could barely tell who they were. How does a powerful leader go from giving famous speeches from a balcony to being displayed like this in public so quickly? Let's go back in time to see how it all happened. By the spring of 1945, many people already believed that Mussolini's time as a leader was completely over. It felt like his political career had ended many times before. In 1943, the King of Italy removed him from power. But then, Hitler rescued him and made him the leader of a new government in northern Italy, in a town called Salo. This government was really controlled by Germany. At the same time, the Allied armies were getting closer and closer, and you could hear their bombs every night. Life for ordinary people was very hard. There were long lines to get food, and there was no gas for cars. Even Mussolini's most loyal government officials were secretly saying that maybe they should try to make a deal with the Allies. On April 18th, Mussolini left for Milan in the north. This was a city that used to celebrate him, but now the city was destroyed. The streetcars were just burnt metal frames, the factories were closed, and the only lights in the sky were from explosions from faraway battles. He stayed in the home of the local archbishop because it was one of the few places that still had electricity. In the evenings, he would burn the love letters his mistress, Clara Petacci, had sent him. More and more cities were being captured by the Allied forces. Soon, the only escape route left for Mussolini was a small road next to Lake Como that went towards the border of Switzerland. He had two choices. He could surrender to the Allies, or he could try to run away. His pride told him the Allies would just make fun of him if he surrendered. His fear told him they would execute him. So, he decided to run. On the afternoon of April 25th, Mussolini prepared his disguise. He stood looking at his reflection in a broken mirror. He shaved off his famous hairstyle, making his head bald. Then he put on an old, worn-out German Air Force coat that was much too large for him. A German agent gave him a grey hat and told him not to talk. His Italian accent would immediately give away his disguise. His mistress Clara did not want to be left behind. She put on her own disguise, hiding her hair under a simple scarf and wearing an old black coat. They both got into a black car. This car was part of a large group of about 30 German trucks heading north. Their plan was to get to Switzerland, use a large amount of money to bribe the border guard, and then disappear. The group of trucks moved very slowly. Allied fighter planes flew down and attacked the road, and Italian resistance fighters, called partisans, blew up bridges ahead of them. By the evening, they had only traveled about 40 miles and had already lost half of the trucks in the convoy. Drivers had to leave their burning trucks and find space for people in any vehicle that was still working. People were crammed into all sorts of cars and vans, including a bus that was carrying German SS officers. When they reached the town of Como, the German army officer there had bad news. He told Mussolini that the mountain passes into Switzerland were now closed. He couldn't help them any further and wished the former leader good luck. A little after midnight on April 27th, the remaining trucks stopped in a small town called Dongo, which was next to the lake. The German officers were arguing, looking at maps in the light from their trucks' headlights. Guards stood around smoking cigarettes. Watching from the hills above the town was a young boy. He noticed a man in the convoy with a very familiar face, a face he had seen in pictures all over his school. He recognized Mussolini. The boy ran to tell the local group of communist partisans what he had seen. The partisans had a plan they called Operation Sun. It was a simple plan. They would block the only road going north with a large truck and have machine guns ready. When the sun came up, they would stop the convoy, check everyone's papers, and capture Mussolini. At 6:15 in the morning, The partisans put their roadblock in place. The German trucks were forced to stop. There was arguing and even some fighting as the partisans checked everyone. When they opened the door of the car Mussolini was in, his mistress Clara screamed and grabbed onto his arm in fear. One of the partisan leaders, a man named Urbano Lazzaro, pointed his gun at them and ordered them to get out of the car. For a moment, Mussolini thought about grabbing the pistol he had hidden under his coat, but he saw that at least 20 other partisans had their guns aimed at him. Mussolini and Clara were forced into a van and taken to an old, damp military building. The large German convoy that had been trying to protect him completely disappeared. For the next 27 hours, the partisans moved Mussolini and Clara from one hiding place to another. They were kept in basements, barns, and storage rooms. This was done to prevent any German soldiers from finding them and trying to rescue them. Their last hiding place was an old farmhouse in the hills above a village called Bonzanigo. The house was cold and damp. The only light came from a single oil lamp, which made shadows dance on the broken walls. A partisan captain put 4 guards on duty to watch them. They worked in shifts and had very strict rules. They were not allowed to talk to the prisoners, drink alcohol, or take anything from them as a souvenir. Inside the room, Mussolini covered himself with a grey blanket to stay warm. He asked for some water, he asked to see a priest, he asked for information about the war, but the guards said nothing. They only gave him a piece of hard, dark bread to eat. Clara knelt on the floor and quietly prayed. Through the window, they could hear church bells ringing. The bells were celebrating Italy's liberation from the war on April 25th. For them, hearing the celebration sounded like a terrible joke. Meanwhile, partisan leaders were sending radio messages back and forth. The main leadership group, called the Committee of National Liberation for Northern Italy, CLNAI, met in Milan to decide what to do. They considered holding a public trial for Mussolini, but they decided it was too dangerous. They worried that German soldiers might try another rescue attempt, like they had done before. A communist leader named Luigi Longo sent a short, direct message. It said to carry out the maximum penalty, which meant that Mussolini was to be executed. A messenger delivered this order to the partisans at Lake Como on the evening of April 27th. The person chosen to carry out the execution was a man named Walter Audizio. He used to sell office supplies, but was now a partisan commander known by the code name Valerio. Early the next morning, on April 28th, he got into an old blue car. He had a driver and 2 bodyguards with him. They also brought 2 machine guns and a bottle of alcohol to give them courage. During the drive, the bottle of alcohol broke, but the guns were undamaged. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Audizio walked into the farmhouse where Mussolini was being held. Mussolini stood up to meet him. His face was pale and grey. Audizio told him, "I am here to settle your account." He asked Mussolini if he wanted to see a priest, but Mussolini said no. He also offered him a blindfold, which Mussolini also refused. Clara began to cry uncontrollably and had to be helped into the car. The car, along with a small bus, drove down the hill towards a small village called Giulino di Mezzegra. They were heading to a place called Villa Belmonte. It was a partially destroyed house with a garden wall that had a view of the lake. Children in the village saw the cars drive by and then ran home. People in the town closed the shutters on their windows as if everyone knew something bad was about to happen. They were taken to a stone wall that was about chest high. You could see holes in the wall from previous shootings. Behind the wall, the water of Lake Como was visible. Audizio pushed Mussolini and Clara against the wall. He lifted his machine gun to shoot, but when he pulled the trigger, it made a clicking sound. The gun was jammed and would not fire. The driver of the car quickly gave Audizio another gun. According to some accounts, Mussolini's last words were an instruction to the executioner. "Shoot me in the chest." Clara screamed his name just as the gun fired. About 20 bullets were fired in just a few seconds. Mussolini fell forward, his arms spread out as if he were in the middle of giving one of his speeches. Clara Petacci was also shot and fell down next to him, her coat becoming soaked with blood. To make sure they were dead, Audizio then shot each of them once in the head. This was the final shot, an action that was never officially ordered but was understood to be necessary. The smoke from the guns slowly floated away over some flowers that were growing nearby. As it got dark, the partisans loaded the bodies onto a truck, covered them with a tarp, and began driving south towards Milan. At every checkpoint they passed, other partisans cheered and demanded to see the body of the dead dictator. In Milan, they decided to take the bodies to a public square called Piazzale Loreto. This was chosen for a specific reason. A year before, fascists had executed 15 partisans and left their bodies in that same square. This was seen as a form of justice. At 9 in the morning on April 29th, the truck arrived at a destroyed gas station in the square. Ropes were thrown over a metal girder that was part of the station's roof. They used the ropes to hang the bodies of Mussolini, Clara, and other fascists upside down for everyone to see. Their pockets had already been emptied by people looking for valuables. Very quickly, a huge crowd of thousands of people gathered in the square. There were workers, children, and even American soldiers who took pictures. The crowd was very angry. People threw stones at the bodies. Someone tied a belt around Mussolini's neck. Another person cut off some of Clara's hair to keep as a souvenir. That evening, American military police arrived and took the bodies down. They were taken to a morgue. 2 days later, the war in Italy officially ended. Pictures of Mussolini hanging in the square were printed in newspapers all around the world. American doctors examined Mussolini's body. They recorded the condition of his organs and counted 23 bullet wounds. He was buried in a grave with no name in a cemetery in Milan. But a year later, in 1946, some of his followers dug up his coffin and stole it. For many years, the police searched for the stolen body. It was hidden in many different places, including churches and farmhouses. Finally, in 1957, the Italian government allowed his body to be buried in his family's tomb in his hometown of Predappio. Today, his tomb is a place people visit, almost like a tourist attraction. People leave flowers there, and on certain dates, some visitors give fascist salutes which are illegal in Italy. Clara Petacci is buried in a different cemetery in Rome, under a simple gravestone where people still leave red roses. A big question that remains is who really fired the shots that killed Mussolini. Over the years, many different people have claimed that they were the one who did it. They have tried to prove their stories with different pieces of supposed evidence. The official story from the communist partisans is that Walter Audicio was the executioner, but other people have different theories. Some believe that British secret agents killed him to prevent embarrassing letters between Mussolini and Winston Churchill from ever being discovered. Official documents that have been released to the public seem to support the idea that the order came from the partisan leadership in Milan, not from Britain. But the situation was very chaotic. Records were not kept properly, sometimes just written on scraps of paper. Many of the witnesses also had political reasons to change or exaggerate their stories. The only things that we know for sure are the most basic facts. Mussolini was executed against a wall, his body and Clara's were taken to Milan, and they were hung up in the public square. Mussolini believed that his power would make him remembered forever as a great man, but in the end, his power led him to a death in a borrowed German coat against a garden wall, and finally being hung by a rope in a gas station. It is common in history for powerful dictators to lose their power, but their fall is often the most dramatic when they start to believe that they are more important than the country they rule. What happened in Piazzale Loreto was like a final strong statement that ended 23 years of fascist rule in Italy. Today, that square is just a busy intersection with cars and traffic lights. There is a small plaque on a wall that serves as a quiet reminder of the terrible events that once took place there. Mussolini's last 2 days, from his capture near a lake to his death and public display at a gas station, feel like a story from a book. It includes a disguise, a betrayal, a dramatic execution, and an angry mob. But what makes it so powerful is that it all really happened. It's a story to remember whenever you hear a leader promise easy solutions or that only a single strong person can fix everything. Remember the image of the public square, the bodies hanging upside down, and the quiet that followed all the violence. If you found this story interesting, please click the like button, share it with a friend, and leave a comment below. Let us know which other historical figures' final days you would like to learn about. Keep asking questions, don't believe everything you hear, and we will see you in the next video.